the alchemy of tattooing, wisdoms of ancestor tattoo, where we explore and revive the ancient understandings and methods of tattooing for transformation, creation, and shifting into a higher vibration through processes so effective that it seems like magic. Or is it indeed the true definition of magic? The alchemy of tattooing. Okay, today I've got Stephanie Big Eagle to talk with us. I'm just going to hand it straight to her to introduce herself, and then we'll get into wherever it leads us.
I'm Petuwashte. My name is Stephanie Big Eagle. I am Lakota and Dakota on my father's side. So my father lives on the Yankton Sioux Reservation in South Dakota. In our way, we are a Lakota and Dakota nation. So thank you for having me on your podcast today, Shane. It's good to see you again. Oh
yeah, it's good to see you. Thank you as well. It's been a while since we've talked, but I've been meaning to have a chat with you about this for ages. So it's really, thank you for joining me on this. We sort of had a little bit of a chat before we started recording here about what we're going to talk about. So tattooing and your peoples and some of maybe the history, what's happened to it, and what it's become now. Maybe we can begin with in history or in the past, before these traditions were lost, the tattooing traditions were lost. How extensively were the people tattooed? Were they heavily tattooed people? Was it everyone, all the tribes? Was it certain tribes? And was it both men and women? Let's just sort of start with that and
okay.
What is remembered?
Okay, so as far as I've learned, and unfortunately, because due to the nature of colonialism that came through late 1800s, especially into the 1900s, particularly for my tribes, Lakota and Dakota, much of the tattoo culture was erased. And especially if we're the Lakota and Dakota, pretty much all of the tattoo history was erased. There was slight evidence that was left, and that's why when I searched for years to find evidence from my nation about our tattoo culture. And when I finally did find it, a little shred of evidence, that's when I actually went over to New Zealand and decided to get my markings. It was something that was really important to me and in my heart and guided me to go ahead and do that. But I had very little evidence to base that upon. And since I've made that decision, which was, say, 6 years ago now, about that, there's a lot more that's come to me that, yes, we definitely had a tattoo culture, but, and the women in our tribe were tattooed on the face. And what it signified, women would have either dots or lines that would run along the eye here. And what those would represent was an aspect of her life. If she was involved in ceremony, a single line could go down the chin. As far as, and this is only what I've been told recently, it may be more, we don't know, because the evidence is gone.
Yeah.
But a line down the chin would denote marriage, coming of age, and there would also be dots or lines on the forehead coming up here. And that would also denote maybe being part of a women's warrior society or ancestral connection. And so that's all I know from my nation. I also know when I looked into other nations or tribes in North America in particular, let's get down into the Cherokee people, they were traditionally tattooed, many from head to toe, extensively. We look up to the Haudenosaunee people, which is East Coast, extensive tattooing men and women there as well, believe it was only the men who tattooed their face. But you would see chiefs with facial tattoos, and that you would know their status because of the tattoos. And then we can go out to West Coast, which is Salish people up to the Inuit in Alaska, down to the California Pomo people or the Maidu people. And you would see that in those areas, it was mostly the women who had facial tattooing. And it was more extensive than in our tribe, which would be more simple markings. But with the California nations, you would see the women it would be very similar to what I'm wearing now in terms of the elaborateness and the amount of tattooing that was done on the face. And so from what I have over a lot of time of thinking about it and trying to pray on these things, because a lot of the evidence was lost, is that it seems that those nations that were closer to the water or the coastal regions or south where the weather was warmer, had more of an extensive tattoo culture, more elaborate markings, more head to toe markings. And I believe that that had to do with the lifestyle, which is because they had more access to, let's say, fishing, resources. They didn't have to travel as much as my people did. So we were plains people, and we followed the buffalo. So we were nomadic, always on the go, living in an area that had very harsh winters, a lot of extremes. And so we didn't have the access to resources as plentifully as the tribes might have had on the coast. And also a lot of our extra time would have been spent hunting, preparing. Scraping a buffalo hide in and of itself takes a long time. And then taking that and turning it into clothing or making that into the canvas for the teepee or, whatever else we did with it, just feeding the people with it was a long process. And so when you think about that, it would explain why we would have had more simple markings as compared to other tribes. But what a common theme that I have noticed through my research, and really I can only speak for my tribe and some of the evidence that I've seen from other nations, but a lot of our markings were messages of identity, but also they were like a passport into the spirit world. So when we would pass on, our relatives would recognize us and be able to find us when we went into the spirit world based on our markings, which were our identity. So when colonization era came through and the effect that especially Christianity had on all of the tribal nations out here, one of the first things that we saw that got pushed out was our tattoo traditions. And so there wasn't a lot left to pick up, especially from my nation, because the influx of Christianity was so overwhelming. And the border school era, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with the boarding school era or if the audience is, but I'll explain a little bit about it.
Yeah.
This would be my great-grandparents' era, late 1800s, early 1900s is when they started to implement the boarding school era, which is where the children were systematically and forcibly removed from their parents. And this goes for all nations here in North America. This happened to all of us. And the children were taken and placed into boarding schools. And so in the boarding schools, they slept there, they ate there, they were completely separated from the parents. And nuns, Christian missionaries, priests were in charge of educating, or more truthfully, assimilating those children. So first thing that would happen when they were brought in is that their hair would be cut, their skin would be scraped, traditional clothing removed, and often traditional names too. and those names would be replaced with more Anglo-Saxon names. And so essentially that was erasing identity right from the beginning. And then these children were raised in a very abusive environment where there was abuse of every form that was inflicted. And it wasn't that these children were so much educated and in these boarding schools as much as they were, their culture was, and their connection to their ancestors was basically beaten out of them. And so that's starting, you know, my great grandparents are boarding school survivors, my grandmother, my father. And so I'm the last one, or I'm the first generation to not go to the boarding schools. And so with the Christian ideals, tattoos were seen as savage. They were seen as the enemy. And so when colonization started spreading through, especially the women's and the people who had facial tattoos, they were targeted. And so for the protection of the people, and because of the indoctrination in the boarding schools and brainwashing and the erasure of culture, tattoos were not allowed for many generations. Not only to protect people, but also from an outside influence by those who went through the boarding school system. And so that's what you'll see through a lot of our nations is the tattoo culture is almost gone, particularly amongst my people, Lakota and Dakota. So but essentially our tattoos are at the foundation of who we are.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've had to really work hard to understand, because I found one elder that I could talk to from my nation over the many years that I've been doing this. One elder came up and told me about and taught me about our culture.
Yeah. Wow. So
it's been a long journey.
Yeah, it is. And so even within that revival, so there's a revival happening now. There's a how's that manifesting? Is it getting a foothold? Is it a thing that people are embracing? Are there many of you? Are there is there a process of it actually coming back again? And
Yes, especially this year. And if you haven't heard of her yet, you should look her up. Her name is Quanah Chasing Horse, and she's Oglala Lakota. And her other nation is one of the Alaskan nations. I can't quite recall exactly which nation. But they, especially in the Alaska area, the traditional people there have been revitalizing their facial tattooing amongst the women. And there it's the women who hold the tradition, it's the women who tattoo. And so they have been leading the way, I should say, in that over the past, let's say, decade of revitalizing that. And it has spread to other nations. So there's California nations that are revitalizing their traditional tattoos, and that's where I have seen over the years the love of it coming back to the people, the understanding coming back to the people. And amongst my tribe, I have seen several women who are starting to take on the chin markings, the lines behind the eyes. There's several of us who have, since I took on my markings in my own way, I have seen other women from my nation start to do the same. And it's really inspiring to see that, because especially from my tribe, we hardly have anything to base it on. We just have to follow our hearts, and that's a very hard thing to do, because you'll see that there's an issue of a lot of times of lateral violence. Because of the colonialization, you'll see that those of us who do have the facial tattoos will get a lot of negative feedback from our own people. A lot of people saying, oh, tattoos aren't allowed. This is not our way. and I can't speak for every family out there, because the way we've always worked in is by tiosh payes, which is extended families, and each tiosh paye can have a different way of doing things. And so when I speak for Lakota or Dakota, I can only speak for my tiosh paye and what I've been taught from my elder and her tiosh paye, the extended family. And so, but the evidence is there that in many Lakota and Dakota tiosh payes, we did have a tattoo culture. And the extensiveness of it isn't well known and at all. So we don't know, but from what I've been told, that there was some very extensive markings on some of our ancestors. Entire arms tattooed, the women with their face tattooed, and there's even stories of where when the settlers started coming through, and there would be, let's say, there was war at that time, and so let's say someone from a settler nation got taken into one of our nations, a woman, and then she'd be returned back to her nation, but she'd be returned back with facial tattoos. So it must have been such an extensive practice back in the day that they said, oh, this poor woman doesn't have any tattoos, let's help her out.
Yeah.
Let's mark her up. She needs to know who she is. She needs to remember. She needs to be honored.
Yes.
And so it's quite for me, it's disheartening to see how much has really been taken to us, to where it's come to the point now where it's a large portion or percentage of our own people look down on it very heavily. But when you understand the boarding school system, and you understand how much we've survived and how extensive brainwashing really was, which I think a lot of Indigenous people around the world have been affected negatively by Christianity. And it's a very powerful sort of negativity that's the brainwashing is so deep, it's hard to come out of it. And so when I think of my grandmother, she was raised in a boarding school. And so of course she would look down on tattoos because of how poorly they were treated by the priests and the nuns. And so I understand the lateral violence now. And so when I see women and men from all the nations here and the tribal nations here that are embracing that tattoo culture that is our right and our birthright and our identity, it's really beautiful to see that, because I don't feel like I'm standing alone anymore.
Yeah. So that kind of brings in, because so much has been lost, as in with what the tattoos were, what the lines were, what the patterns were, if there's not a lot of recording of that, what do you do now, like to to bring the tattooing style back in, or not back in, but I guess what I'm trying to ask is what patterns can you use? Is it a process of, even though there's no physical evidence of, okay, those designs, that pattern, that's where that went, is there a process of almost your own remembering, having to tap into your own DNA, your own cellular memory to access what may have been worn, what the patterns were, to be able to use or create something now? Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
And that's what I have done extensively. I've had to, because there wasn't a lot to base, there was hardly anything to base the designs upon. What I have had to learn how to do is to tap deep into my guidance system, my heart, my DNA, because even though we went through such an extensive genocide, culturally and physically, the DNA is still inherent within us. And and when I was growing up, I was separated from my culture, so I didn't get raised in this way at all. I didn't even know that I was Lakota and Dakota. I was raised with the belief that my people were good for nothing, and that they were, good for nothing drunks, and that it was best for me to stay far away from it. And so I was very racist towards my own self and separated, disconnected. And so eventually I started having these powerful visions of my ancestors coming to me and giving me hugs, coming to me in dreams and showing me things that I had no idea even existed in this world. And so those dreams were so powerful and impactful upon me that I decided, there must be something more to this side of me than they've been telling me all my life. And so that's when I was 23, I went out and I reconnected with my father, and he was living on the reservation out here. So I went out, I reconnected, I went to my first wachipi, which is a powwow. And that's a dance, that's a celebration that we usually have in the summer times. So it's a gathering of the people, and we dance and celebrate, sing. And so when I saw that for the first time, I said, wow, these are my people. I finally can look outside of myself and see someone that looks like me, that has the features, that has the big nose, that has the things that European culture doesn't really think is beautiful.
Yeah.
And, so that's when I really started embracing who I was. But that embracing came from my DNA. It came from my ancestors coming to me and saying, look, you have something within you that is extremely powerful and that is going to open up this pathway for you to find your healing and your connection and your purpose. And we are asking you to seek this out. And so from that point, I learned how to follow my heart and to follow that guidance system that is in my DNA that is so powerful from our ancestors because of what we've had to go through, what we've had to survive. That genetic connection is very strong. And so when I'm creating designs, I pull from that same connection because I learned to trust that connection, and that connection is here to guide me, and that connection is who I truly am. And so, yes, when I'm creating designs, although I don't have anything to base it on in terms of pictures or someone to sit me down and teach me about our tattoo culture, I can reach in here and pull it out because that's what my ancestors left behind for me.
Because it's recorded in that lineage. It's recorded, not just, it doesn't need to be recorded here physically on a form or a piece of paper or whatever. It's recorded. It's recorded because it's within your cellular memory, it's within your DNA, it's within your ancestors, and that connection, that communication with them that's where it's getting shared. So yeah, well, that's amazing. That's really powerful. With some of these, so for your people, are there any that have remained? Are there any? Was it totally gone? And maybe not just say with your tribes, but are there other tribes that do have recorded certain patterns and designs that have survived?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you the tribes, let's see, some of the California nations have extensive documentation of their traditional tattoos, especially the women's markings. Some of the Inuit nations, up in Alaskan tribal nations, have also evidence of their markings. Some down the Cherokee, you see that the nations that more along the coast, a lot of them have a lot more documentation that came up in their photographs of their traditional markings. So yes, some other nations do have documentation that can be pulled from to base their designs on. And what I have to base on from my nation is that we do have some documentation of the lines here and the honor markings here. Very little, but there are some stories from that and elders that have given me some of that information as well. We have there's an elder, and he was a medicine man. John Fire Lame Deer wrote he's a Lakota medicine man. And he wrote in his book about the meanings of our tattoos and why we would get them, and that they were basically like passports into the spirit world. And he would tell the story of that when we cross over into the spirit world, that if we didn't have a certain marking on our wrist, which was a dot in a certain place, and that was for a man, but if a woman didn't have a certain marking on her face, then they wouldn't be able to cross the spirit woman who sits between the earth and the spirit world. She would look for those markings, and if she couldn't find them, then she would throw them back to the earth as a wanagi or a ghost. And so he said that's how important our tattoos were to us, because if we didn't have them, we wouldn't be able to join our ancestors. And there's another prominent Dakota historian. I believe his name is Vine Deloria Jr., and I can't guarantee that, but there is another prominent Dakota historian that said that we even tattooed our children. So because we didn't want them to have to be thrown back to the earth as wanagis or ghosts if they didn't have tattoos.
Yeah.
And so from my nation, we have more of the meanings behind the tattoos and why they were given, as opposed to the designs. And so, but I think that if we can go back and we look at old 19th century beadwork, we can look at the designs that we see over ceremonial items and moccasins and even old pottery and things, that we would be able to pull those designs from that work and to use them to say, okay, these were designs that were important to our ancestors, so important that they would place them on their regalia or their pipe bags or their ceremonial items. So if we're looking for designs that would do that for our most sacred markings that our ancestors would be able to recognize us by when we cross into the spirit world, then maybe we should take some of those designs and use them. But also use our own guidance system and our DNA genetic connection to determine what is for us to use.
Yes.
But yes, other nations, particularly coastal nations, do have evidence within pictures and paintings of old tattoos.
Cool. So, I mean, in that, you've already sort of explained that there's a spiritual connection with some of the patterns, some of the designs. So there's, a lot of patterns and a lot of designs of a lot of cultures use certain shapes to create a vibrational resonance with something that's elsewhere or outside or in another world or the spirit realm or in this world. I guess you kind of answered that, didn't you? There's ones that have meanings for the spiritual realms or for ancestral reasons. What about patterns that are in vibrational resonance with this world, with animals, with plants, with things in nature? Is that evident in some of the patterns and reasons people got tattooed?
I could see, so this is past reference, yes?
Yeah, and
okay.
Wherever you want to take it, if it's something that's happening more now or, yeah.
So I have seen markings such as, a person who is connected with, let's say his medicine comes from the lightning nation.
Mm-hmm.
you would see that person that would get lightning markings all the way down their body, even down their thighs, down to the ground,
Mm-hmm.
to honor that energy.
Mm.
And I've seen a Yankton Sioux warrior. Wow, I actually just faced this until now, but there is evidence from the Dakota side that was caught in a drawing from an ethnographer who came through the area and did drawings of the people here. But he was a Yankton Sioux, so Dakota warrior, and he had 2 bear prints tattooed on his chest.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would have been his medicine.
Mm.
So yes, there is evidence of having that. And one of my elders, she's Dakota and Lakota, she said that her grandmother, and they have always had tattoos in her history as far back as she can remember.
Mm.
So this is from a traditional teaching.
Mm.
But her grandmother taught her to put a symbol that she resonated with on her body, which at the time was the butterfly.
Mm.
So she's like, put that butterfly on you. So when you cross over into the spirit world, I can find you. I will know who you are.
Mm.
So yes, I think that the designs had everything to do with our identity in whatever form that was. It could have been, and I've been told that if a woman had an issue with fertility, that they could put a fertility sign on her wrist, and that would help her conceive. If you needed healing from something, then there would be a certain design for that. If you needed protection, there'd be a marking for that. If you were married, there'd be a marking for that. So it's all about our identity and sending a message, not only to those that saw us on a daily basis, but to our ancestors in the spirit world.
Mm.
So yes, certainly all of
Yeah.
that was there.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. There's an importance in keeping a tradition and a purity to our tattooing for all cultures, just so that connection to our ancestors and this continued purity without it being interfered with or changed so much it's unrecognizable. So there's some patterns that really need to stay there and continued through. With that in mind, so that's maybe something that's there, needs to be maintained. Now with more with the revival that's happening now, do the tattooists that are creating the patterns and the designs for this day and age, are their doors open to creating new symbolism and things that relate to what's happening with the people now?
Yes, I very much think so. Well, for instance, I'll just take the design that I created for the Standing Rock movements, and that is this design, which is the Thunderbird. But this is based on, the Thunderbird is an ancient symbol, but things like that are getting used in this day and age to relate to our movements, indigenous resistance movements, to be used as power, to be used as medicine, protection, prayer. And so when I created this design, I wanted to invoke, to pray to those beings which are represented in this design, the thunder beings, or the Wakion Oyate. And they are the bringers of the rain. Without them, we wouldn't have the water that we have, that we were protecting in the Standing Rock movement. And so to me, it was like, so there's a traditional, teaching that we give of our flesh, we sacrifice to make offerings to the thunder beings, because they really like that. They like it when we take a flesh offering and give it to them and put it in a ceremonial way on our altar. And so giving of a tattoo, that's a sacrifice, that's a flesh offering, that is part of and so not a lot of people understood that at the time that I created that design, that that you can't just quite say that right out in the open to everybody, because it's not going to be received or understood really well. But I feel like I can share that here because it will be. And so everybody who got that marking was giving a flesh offering to the thunder beings and carrying that prayer on their skin, which is saying, hey, we need help. Indigenous nations in Great Turtle Island, or what's now known as America, which includes Canada and down into South America, North America, we have been made invisible for far too long. And so we are standing up now, not only for our nations, but for all nations who have a right to clean and pure drinking water, and to not have the earth continuously be over harvested, raped, destroyed. And so the prayer that was carried in this marking was imploring the thunder beings through the sacrifice that each of us makes in carrying this design on our skin and becoming one with it, is that help us, stand with us, protect us, help us to overcome these corporations who have this agenda that doesn't serve us, that doesn't serve the earth, but only destroys us and enslaves us, and enslaves and destroys the earth. So help us. And it symbolized all the people coming together to stand for that cause. And so that's the intention, and the meaning behind the marking is absolutely everything. And so I see other Indigenous tattoo artists here, particularly in the Americas, that are doing the same thing. It's about marking up our warriors, helping them prepare for battle, shielding them. And I have seen the power of the tattoo. So as you already know, a lot of the messages that I received are from my visions or from my dreams. And so I had this dream once, and we can see this being very relevant right now as we see this chaos that we're in. We see the issues that our society is facing on an international level. So in this dream, I was in a concentration camp, and I was with my youngest son. And in this concentration camp, they had all the people lined up, and let's just call them officers, had this device. And so they walked along to every person, and they held up this device to them. And the device subjugated them just by its energy. It subjugated them. And so they could easily move on to the next person. But when they came to me, I held up my Thunderbirds like this in front of me. And I could see them light up, and it shielded their energy device. It couldn't affect me. And it's made them so angry. And they took me and my son, and they threw us into this padded vehicle, looked like a Hummer or a SWAT vehicle or something. They put us in there, and then they turned on this really, this vibration that I felt like it was killing me, So I held my body over my son, and I could hear, and I just was like, I think this is gonna kill us. We're gonna die. But all of a sudden, I heard my ancestors yell at me. They said, "Sing, sing." And I said, the last thing I feel like doing right now is singing.
Yeah.
They kept yelling at me to sing. And so I sang. And as soon as I started singing, it ended the dream, and I snapped right out of it. And so what I learned from that situation is that our tattoos can be shields to we all know that there is something not right in this world right now. There is some sort of, matrix or some kind of grid system that keeps us in a lower vibrational state. And so that dream showed me that our tattoos that are imbued with prayer and meaning can be shields to certain levels of lower vibrational energy.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to their full-on attack, then we have our songs,
Mm-hmm.
which is our culture, which is our ancestral connection
Mm-hmm.
that can blow it all out of the water.
Yeah, wow.
Mm.
Oh, goosebumps.
Jeez.
Amazing. That's, yeah, beautiful. What a way to, because they're using a certain frequency, a certain, they were using some kind of frequency machine or something against you. Your frequency of your tattoos repels that or protects you. Same with the song against their frequency that they were bombarding you with. It's amazing. It's really cool. That's a stuff that I talk about a lot in my podcast as well, is that difference in what they are using and what we can use, and bringing that back. Our ancestors understood a lot about frequency and the use of it, and raising of frequencies as well, and keeping ourselves above those lower frequencies that can be detrimental to us and used as to attack. Is there much knowledge you can share with us about the tools that we used, the tools, the pigments, the applications, stuff like that? Is there much you can share with us around that subject?
And I actually just found this out just a few months ago. So from our nation, which is Lakota and Dakota. So the ink that would have been used back in the day would have come from ash. So they would have taken some ash from the fire and mixed it with bear grease.
Mm-hmm.
And that would have been the black ink. And then red ink would be collected from some mountains in the area, sacred mountains, that they would go and collect the red rocks and mash it up and also mix it with bear grease. And that was used for traditional paint. So the men would paint their faces with that red and put red line down the center of the head here. But that was also used in tattoos for the red ink. So in terms of the needle, we use porcupine quills here in the plains, porcupine quills. And from what I know from other nations, they would have used cactus thorns, fish bones, and there was even, as far as I think that's extensive, the extent of what I know in terms of what we would have used. So fish bones, cactus thorns, porcupine quills, which, wow, to me, porcupine quills just say, I can't imagine the pain.
Yeah.
Because they're usually barbed, and cactus thorns too are, they're not designed to easily go in and out of the flesh like the tattoo needles we have in this day and age.
Yeah.
So I think we have it easy compared to what our ancestors had to go through for their markings.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know if, was there a ceremony? Was it ceremonial? Was it something that was done with many people present, or was it something that was done privately? Was it, I know some of these are probably hard to know with so much information lost, but yeah,
as far as I know, it would have been from the information that I've gotten from some of the stories that have been left behind from our ancestors and our elders who shared some of the knowledge in the books and things, that it was considered very sacred. And because these were markings that would help us cross into the spirit world, that yes, it would have been done in ceremony. And coming of age ceremonies for the young women, men becoming warriors. I am speaking from the heart right now, but yes, this would have been very sacred. And from what I've learned, when I haven't brought ceremony into each and every tattoo that I do, even if it's for someone who's non-Indigenous, that, I kind of have to pay for it. I have to carry energy that doesn't belong to me, or I get extremely drained. And so I have had to learn the hard way, because I didn't have anyone to teach me
Mm.
the right and proper way and hard way, which is that if I don't smudge off, if I don't pray, if I don't call in our ancestors and thank them for being there and ask for their help,
Mm.
then I don't get that help.
Mm. Mm.
And
Mm.
so I would think that, yes, based on that evidence, my own personal experience, and based on what the elders have shared, is that yes, this was considered a very sacred ceremony. And that means there would have been probably fasting back in the day. There would have been preparation of going into the purification lodge.
Mhm.
There would have been, okay, make sure you eat this and not that. You drink this and not that. You get it at this season and not this season. There was probably an extensive amount of protocol that came into it back in the day.
Yeah.
And so we're relearning those things now, the hard way, my way,
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
hard way. And there's also John Fire Lame Deer in his book Secret Visions. The 17th, I believe, generation keeper of the white buffalo calf pipe, which is what our entire ceremonial culture is based upon, as Lakota and Dakota people, is the teachings that the prophet white buffalo calf woman brought to our people 19 generations ago.
Mm.
And so she brought the pipe, which is the Chanupa, and our 7 sacred ceremonies. And she said that there would be a time coming when nearly everything of us would be taken from us. And that includes, of course, our culture and even our spirits. So that is the time that we're in now, where we see the results of almost everything being taken from us. But these traditions, these ceremonies were brought to us through white buffalo calf woman and through that Chanupa, our pipe, that helped us to survive. I would say it's probably the only reason that we've survived to this point, is because of those traditions and those ceremonies and that sacred way of life. And so the 17th generation keeper of the white buffalo pipe was a woman. And I believe she's either 17th or 16th, but John Fire Lame Deer, that Lakota medicine man, met with her, and he helped do a healing on her. And in exchange, she gifted him a tattoo. And that tattoo had a secret meaning that he didn't share in the book, but he said that it was meant to help him in his own healing journey and to protect him. And so because she was a keeper of the pipe, that means she was a medicine woman. She was a holy woman. And so everything she would have done would have been done in a very sacred way, with ceremony, with protocol, with spiritual law being the prominent guidance system of everything she did. And so knowing that, then I would say, yes, there was probably so much that was done back in the day in preparation for our markings. And they would have been earned, but they would have also been, rites of passage, coming into age ceremonies. And so we're definitely picking that back up.
Awesome. Just to kind of round some things up, and what you've been talking about is so enlightening, so much information you've shared there, and I've learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else listening has. Is there anything, what would you like to talk about? What's important for you in the revival of these tattoo traditions of your people? What have you got, anything you want to say or you want to share? And then we can go into where you are, where your studio is, where you work, how you work, and go from there.
Okay. So I'll start with a lot of what I've had to carry, being one of the first women from my nation to carry facial tattoos. And that is lateral violence. That is being that Indigenous people have have had to struggle so hard to hold on to our cultures and to our way of life. Our connection to the earth itself has been under attack for generations. And so part of the results of that is where we will have people from our own nations that are sometimes the most hurt of all, and sometimes the most negative of all. And so I have had to deal with that with being, someone who's learned how to follow my heart because it was part of my survival. It's what saved my life, really. And so when I followed my heart and I decided to say, look, I'm going to go get these tattoos because it's what I feel it's right for me. This is what I need to do. My ancestors say, yes, please do this. When I come back, and it's what I am so pleased with, my connection to you, to other Tamilko artists that I've worked closely with, is that the talks that I've had, that when I was there receiving my markings, the culture that's still there has helped me so much in my walk over here and in the work that has to be done over here, because I would say that the disconnection wasn't as extensive with the Maori people as it was for us. We're talking about more extensive in terms of time and more extensive in the terms of the genocide that we had to endure, where some things were completely lost nearly. And so the fact that I was able to, at the time where we were still able to travel internationally, and that I learned how to follow my guidance system and to do those things that have now become, been the determining factors in where I'm at in life now. If I didn't decide to take on my markings, I wouldn't be tattooing. I wouldn't be. It found me because I followed my heart, but when I come back to the States, and I had to walk alone in it for so many years, there was a lot of issues that I faced in terms of, you shouldn't have those. What did you do to your face? What were you thinking? And I faced it from my own family. I faced it from people in the streets. I faced it from my people, people from my nation who didn't necessarily know me, but knew of me. And so I had to struggle for many years to find my place in my own self, of saying, sometimes doubting my choice. So, trying to stand strong in that. And, did I have a right to take these? Did I do something wrong? And I think that, all of us as Indigenous people can relate to that. Because there has been so much that has been taken from us that, every single one of us has grown up having to walk in two different worlds, is this right for me to take on? Because maybe I didn't do this, and that, to earn this. But I've come to this point that it's our birthright. And when we connect to that place within ourselves where our ancestors are, they want us to embrace who we are. And sometimes it comes to, okay, you don't have to go to all of these different, notches or check marks that you need to make in order to earn something that was purposefully taken from you. You need to just do it, because sometimes only in taking that on are you going to come to that place where you can understand what it is. And that has been my experience, where I just had to go. I had to trust my heart and go with it. And by going with it, then all these other doors opened up that would have never opened up if I didn't just do it and go for it. And so when I say that, I say, yes, there will be those people from your own nation, from other nations, that will tell you that you shouldn't do that, that will judge you, that will try to put you down, that will never like you again because of a choice you made, but we have to look into our own hearts and make that decision for ourselves about what's right for us and the things that we're going to reclaim from our own culture, from our own genetic connection that are right for us. And that is part of us stepping forward as Indigenous people in this day and age, as in this time when we actually have the opportunity to do these things again, where we can't just be killed for it, where we can't be just jailed for practicing our culture and our traditions. So we have to drop that fear, and we have to go for it. And I think that's with those people that we see making those choices that are not making choices out of fear, but making choices out of what their heart guides them to do, and praying on it in your own way. Because some of us don't have access to the ceremonies, and we don't have access to elders. We don't have anyone to ask. At the time when I took on my markings, I didn't have anyone to ask. I had to go within, and I had to pray, and I had to get that answer. And so I encourage anyone who's wanting to do that for themselves to do that as well. And to not let the fear of what other people are going to think or say or do hold you back from what's right for you and from what your heart tells you to do. And so as Indigenous people, we have that genetic connection. We have that DNA. And so we have to learn to trust that, because if anything, that's what colonization tried to take away from us, was our connection.
Yeah, important words, really important words. Wow, cool. So where are you? Where are you working from? You've got your own studio now, or your own place you're working from? I've seen some stuff on your social media around that, and looks beautiful. And you got a book as well, haven't you?
I do.
If you can bring that into it as well. Let us know. Tell us all about you and where you are and what's.
Okay. So I am based out of Indianapolis, Indiana, which is the heart of the middle of America, United States. And my studio is called Thunderbird Rising Studios. So it's half is my studio where I do the handpoke tattoo, and the other half is like a retail side where we offer the art products made by Indigenous creators. So I say Indigenous because I don't want to be just to the tribal nations of America or anything. I want to work with Indigenous artists all around the world. It's always been part of a vision of mine to showcase or to share the beauty of all the Indigenous nations of the world, in terms of people that I know, and that I can share their story, that I have a connection to them, that I can bring that and say, oh, this is my friend, or this is my auntie that makes this. This is the art of this person, and they did this. And part of that is how are we going to break down the stereotypes that unfortunately still predominate many outsiders' view of us. And so I offer that space in my studio to give what is here a very underrepresented minority, which is Indigenous people, that space to show their talent, their beauty, their culture, their arts, and their ingenuity. So that's what that half is, and event. It's growing, it's building, but we hosted our first event on Indigenous Peoples Day. So we had a lot of people come through for that, and it was quite successful. We danced, we blessed the studio, we opened it up, and we showed our presence in a place where many people don't even know that we still exist. So eventually I'll have elders come through and teach, different topics, teach about traditional medicines, how to make, how to scan a hide, things like that. So it's a space for that. But yes, I also wrote a book. So this is my memoir, Thunderbird Rising, and it's my story. Before I I'm at the point now, it's my story of a survival story. It's all the things that I went through as a child, you know, being disconnected, growing up in an abusive home, being in abusive relationships, and also the understanding of coming into who I was through my genetic connection, through the visions that I had, and going from being this person who was very ashamed of my native ancestry, to being awakened to it by my ancestors, to then going into the world of activism, Indigenous activism and resistance, and all of the things that I experienced from that world, to where, you know, losing my children because of it, political prisoner for a while, and the things that I learned about the injustices that our people have been through. So I basically got crash coursed into that, you know, in my 20s and early 30s, and I always learned the hard way, you know, but sometimes that's the best way.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's my story about, you know, how did I survive all of those things that I went through? What helped me heal my soul? Because, you know, as Indigenous people, we have an epidemic in many of our communities of suicide, substance abuse, disconnection from the culture. And, you know, I've had my own personal experiences with that. And many of it is a direct result of colonization. It's, you know, having to walk in two worlds and to be, you know, find our identity and our place in it, and to, how do you stay sane when we're living in such an insane world? And so I share that, especially as Indigenous people, because our sanity came from our connection to the land. So when it's hard to be connected in that way, that's why we have these issues in our communities. And so I wanted to address those issues and say, look, this is what I've been through. Look at all the things that I've been through, and look at the things that came and that lifted me up and that helped me. And that hopefully by me sharing these things and just giving a perspective of an Indigenous point of view, of especially a woman, of what it's like to survive some of these things, to experience it, just to see the world the way that many of us do. And how do we find what's real? How do we connect to our identity? And then to our ancestors, and to find our power again. And so I did that in my book. How I got to that point, and looking real at the trauma. It's because so many of us as Indigenous people have been through it and are going through it.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted people to know that they're not alone, and to talk about these issues and say, you know, if I can do it, you can do it. Because I don't think there's anything that I haven't been through and survived.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I'll put links to your social media, your book below this. Wow, so amazing talking to you. That was a really, really cool conversation, and there are some really important things we talked about, brought up, learnt. Kind of round it up there, eh? And carry on with our days. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It's been an honor.
it's a blessing to have been talking to you, and for, you know, I'm sure everyone else that's listening to this and watching this is really, you know, thankful for that and for your words as well. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Doksha.